there, it's Beth from Sassy and Crafty. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make some different mixed media backgrounds using Color Burst by 𝐂𝐿, water, Deco Foil, and gel medium. First, what I'm going to do is spray my cardstock with some water. This helps the powder to spread into a paint. There's a couple different ways to apply this powder. Today I applied it directly to the cardstock and then used water to manipulate it. As you can see, it starts to bloom almost immediately when it touches the water. What I like about spraying my paper first is that I can control where the paint goes. Sometimes you get a little bit more than you might want, but you can pick up the excess with a paper towel. And that kind of helps me get the intensity that I want on the paint, and it allows it to blend as well. I'm going to go ahead and spray again for my next color, and what I'm doing here is creating a rainbow. Using these paints you can get a very bright look, or you can get a softer look really easily. They're honestly a lot of fun to play with, and I think they're great for anybody whether you're experienced with watercolor or not. I use my water brush to help spread this color, and help it go exactly where I wanted it to go. Sometimes you can get a little more powder in some spots than others, but you can always make it more fluid by adding more water. I'm using a cold press watercolor cardstock because it really holds up to getting a lot of water in it. And again, I'm going to use that same paper towel to lift up color. I'll be using that paper towel a little bit later in a technique, so I'm being very intentional about how I pick that up. If you're using a dirty paper towel, you want to make sure that you only press the clean parts to your cardstock, because it will transfer back to your project. I didn't like how olive the green was in this set, so what I ended up doing is I started spreading it out, and I just wasn't happy with the color it was giving me, so I added blue directly into the green. I then used my water brush to mix it directly to change the color. I probably would have done this a little differently in the future, but I am not unhappy with what happened here. And the blue is super intense, so I sprayed even more water to help get it spread out a little further over my project. I'm going to go ahead and pick up a lot of that right here. And I wasn't sure how I wanted it to end, so I ended up and sprayed a little more water. You can see there was a little blue powder left on the cardstock, but that's okay because it's going to be gone when I'm finished. I finished up with this really pretty purple, and the purple is also pretty intense, so I didn't need a whole lot of it. And I spread it around and I went ahead and lifted it up, and you can see we've got a really pretty rainbow going on there. I really do like the way that this looks, but I wanted it to be even more fluid. So I went ahead and sprayed the entire thing again. What I love about these paints is that they move so easily. So if you're not happy with something, you can add water and completely change the look of it. I noticed that there were some spots of cardstock here, and this is still in the yellow, and when I sprayed because it's so wet, I can actually get a second print here. I really loved what that did, and it ended up being so pretty. I had even more water on my first print, so I used a paper towel to pick that up. And I do suggest when you get your paper towels wet like this, save them, because there's several things you can do. For example, you can run them through your die machine, you can use it to put impressions down, or you can play with them with stencils. And I'm going to show you how I did that today. I decided not to use my palette for this because I wanted to use my embossing mat instead. it just has a little bit of give that helps with the impression. I'm laying down our offset stripe stencil, and I'm coming back with that paper towel that I just got full of ink. I'm going to use a 6-inch sprayer, but I need to make sure that it's wet enough to press through. So you can see as soon as I started pressing here, the color starts to lay down. And this was my first time doing it, so it did take me a couple of tries with the water. What I realized is that not only can you spray water down, but if you're just not getting enough color through, you can actually add color back to the paper towel. I did that here, and I noticed that when I applied color to the paper towel, I had a lot more control where the paint went, so that's definitely something I'm going to do again in the future. I'm pressing pretty hard here, so if you have some hand issues or arthritis, you might not want to do this technique, but you can run it through your die machine and get a similar effect. I wanted a bit more color, so I did add some red directly to the paper towel, and I had pre-made some sprays with these paints, and I sprayed this paper towel directly with the purple spray that I had already made. Now, I know that it looks like a big mess, and you can see my hands are super inky. And if you don't like inky hands, that's okay. Go ahead and do the same thing, but grab some gloves. I actually will be wearing gloves a little bit later in the video, but I wanted to let you know that I had an event the same evening that I recorded this video, and I did get all of the paint off of my hands. So it does come off. Feel free to get inky and have fun. I'm really excited by how this looks. It's got just a little subtle rainbow. You can also see the stencil poking through, and it gives it just a little bit of texture. And I'm going to set that aside and work on my next piece. This time I did not use a stencil. I just placed my rainbow piece down and did the same technique with my brayer. You can tell this one's a little wet, so I didn't need to press very hard at all. And it wasn't transferring as much as I wanted, so I went ahead and rotated the paper towel to place color all over my project. It ended up with a really subtle effect, but I also liked how you could see the pattern from the paper towel. And I ended up stopping here because I'm excited with how it looks. Now I'm going to come back in with one of my rainbow pieces that I wasn't really happy with, and what I'm going to do is show you how to turn that piece into a galaxy background. Galaxy backgrounds can be really fun, and there's some different mediums that you can use to make them. I did decide to use the same paints, and you're going to see me pick up and put down the paint several times. You want to see that rainbow shine through because it's what makes a really pretty galaxy. So you don't want to just cover it in your blues and your purple. You also want it to be deep enough to give you that space feeling. So I'm coming in with the blues and purple and spreading it around kind of mishmash. And when I'm done here, you'll see that even though it looks very dark and very textured, that there are awesome spaces where that color shines through. I couldn't even get a really good picture, but when you see it in person, the greens and the blues are really pretty shining through that rainbow. And at this point, my paper towel is pretty covered, but I'm not going to be spreading it around everywhere, so be very conscious of that. I left a spot in the middle kind of open, and that's where you get the most colors peeking through, and that's what kind of gives you that nebula look. Now, I'm adding my stars using 𝐂𝐴𝐧𝐴𝐻 Unicorn White. I'm going to use a palette knife to pick up from that ink pad, and I wanted to mention that I only use this ink pad for mixed media, so if you're using it for something else, you might want to be a little more careful. You can see I kind of tore up that pad a little bit. I am going to use a water brush to lay down stars. And when I first went in, it wasn't wet enough, so I sprayed it with my spritzer just to get it mobile. And there's different techniques for different size stars, and you can kind of see me switch it up. I start by tapping on my palette knife, and then I switch to kind of brushing off of the palette knife. A little bit in here, I'm going to get a little more water out of my brush to get the ink even wetter. The more fluid your ink is, the softer your stars are going to be, so just keep that in mind. I like having soft stars because it's going to give you a lot of texture and dimension, and I'm just going to keep adding stars until I'm happy. And I think that looks really good, so I'm going to put that aside to dry. I'm going to come back with our rainbow piece that I created earlier. Because the cardstock got so wet, it started to curve, but that's okay. I'm going to use some purple tape to put it down on my mat, and then I'm going to get started with my stencil. I learned recently that you can use pixie spray to affix foil to your project. Pixie spray is a light tack adhesive, and it's used for keeping stencils in place when you're using them, but it also helps foil to stick to it really well. I waited a little too long for this first pull, so when I picked it back up, I wasn't excited about the lack of foil on this project. So I put my stencil back down, I went ahead and sprayed the pixie spray again, and this time I went a little bit faster because I wanted to make sure that this pixie spray was still wet enough to really hold on to that stencil. And there you see, I'm going to put it back down and lift it up. And this time when I lift it up, it's going to be super foiled and pretty. And I love this foil from ThermoWeb, and this particular color is called Shattered Rainbow. Moving on, now I'm going to be using a different technique using a product from Kindred Stamps. This is called Glitter Gloss, and it's basically a mixed media gel. What I love about this particular product is that it's super thick and super glittery, and it's safe to add water to. If you don't like how thick it is, or if it's dried up on you, if you didn't get a good seal when you closed it, you can always add water, mix it up again, and it's good to go. I'm going to use 3 different colors here and kind of blend them. You want to be really careful when you're putting your excess back in your jar because you don't want it to mix with other colors. And I just realized that I left my glitter gloss open and that my other one was so tight I was having trouble getting it open, so I took it off camera to struggle with it for a bit. You want to remember to clean off your palette knife in between uses because you also can get that color mix, and that's not fun. You don't want pink in your yellow glitter gloss. So when you go to touch the other colors, you don't want that blended part to go back in your glitter gloss. Now I'm actually going to go in and I'm going to blend a little bit with that pink so there's no straight lines when I pull up my stencil. And I added even more because I like to have a really thick covering of this gloss. It just gives it a lot of dimension and makes it super fun. I went ahead and finished with that electric blue, and I'm really loving the way the 3 colors go together. Now, I took a minute to clean off my stuff because you want to get the glitter gloss off the stencil pretty quickly, and came back to finish up the cards. I finished these cards up by using our Sassy Girls Crafty set and Have a Blast. And I wanted to give you a little trick for our Sassy Girls and a scan and cut or a pick scan because these stamps are open on the bottom and that can make it really hard to get a good cut. So I stamped these girls in with VersaFine ink. I'm not planning on coloring them, so that ink's fine to use for that. And what I do is I place a very light pencil line here. The line needs to be thick enough that your scan and cut or your cutting machine can recognize it, but you don't want to draw it on too dark because we're going to erase it later. So you want to place down your pencil very lightly, and I go over it a couple times so that it's still easy to erase. This technique is great for any stamp that has any kind of cutoff like our Sassy Girls, or you can also close it in any lines. And now that I've done that, I'm going to put those in my scan and cut and assemble some fun cards. Here are our final projects. I used Blast Off with our Galaxy card and Sassy Girls Crafty with our 2 mixed media projects. I didn't add sentiments, but you can always add a sentiment on the front or in the inside, whichever you prefer. For this show, our deals are spend $20, get 20% off, spend $50, get 25% off, and if you spend $100, you'll get 30% off your entire purchase. Any purchase over $75 will get a free Sassy pack while supplies last, and if you're new to our company, we have an extra special gift because first-time purchasers will get a discount code to use on a future order. I hope you enjoyed getting inky with me, and I hope you'll check out Sassy and Crafty at www.sassyandcrafty.com.